Thank you, sir.
All right, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. आवाज नहीं है. Good afternoon, everyone. आवाज नहीं है. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.
Sir, you got a dress to wear, Dr. Manish.
I will. I will. So what I will do is, okay, I am not going for. Anyway, thank you, AMOGs. Thank you, organizing secretaries, organizing chairperson, madam is there for a very different session. I will just explain what we are going to do in this session so that everybody will understand. I request all of you to just grab a seat and settle down. I also request, please put your mobiles on either vibrator mode or switch off mode, because we are going to discuss something which is very important for us to discuss, and with the help of experts and our expert judge there to take good carry home messages so that we have a good practice. Ma'am, there are a lot of places. Please settle down. There are a lot of places. Okay. All right. Hello. Okay. All right. So friends, we have 4 cases. All these cases in your practice, in my practice, we face, every day, every month. We have a lot of experts sitting here. The job of 4 people, including me, are 2. We have those cases and we have issues which we want to discuss. So what we are going to do is, myself, Dr. Pardeshi sir, Dr. Ajay Mane and Dr. Sudesh, we are fighting advocates from the patient's point of view. So we are going to raise all questions which the patient or the patient's advocate are going to raise in these particular cases. Questions will be directed to all our experts who are sitting here, because clinically they will tell us what is to be done. Correct? We can also have some questions. If you want to ask, write them on a piece of paper and get here. And our judge, respected Dr. Gopinath Shenoy sir, will put or throw light on whether the allegations which we are going to make, the defenses which our experts are going to give, are for the benefit of the doctor or not, and his word will be final word. Are we all game now? Okay? All right. So cases, we are not for the doctors. 4 of us are with the patient. So we are going to put allegations from the cases. So I request Dr. Rajendra Singh Pardeshi sir to have the first case. His case is birth injury. So there will be a case and he is going to raise a lot of questions. So I hope all the experts have had good lunch. आपको इसके पहले और ये खत्म होने के बाद आपकी एमडी की वाइवा याद आ जाएगी, मैं प्रॉमिस करता हूँ. ओके फ्रेंड्स, सो दिस इज केस नंबर 1.
My lord, now our client, Mrs. XYZ, during her first pregnancy, was going to regular medical checkup under Dr. ABC obstetrician at nursing home. Our client's grandmother was having history of diabetes mellitus. Her HbA1c was 5.9, normal up to 6. Blood sugar was 105 fasting. PP was 140. She was assured of good progress of her pregnancy and that there was no need to worry about health of the mother and child. Her LMP was 1st January 2004 and EDD was 8th October 2004. She went ultrasound 4 times. USG done on 1st September, baby weight was 3.250. Another USG was done on 15th of September. Another was on 1st October. Was 3.5. Patient developed labor pains. Admitted the patient in the nursing home. On admission, Dr. ABC assured that the condition of mother and baby were fine and she will have normal delivery. As the patient was unable to bear the prolonged and difficult labor pain, Therefore, she repeatedly requested to Dr. ABC to perform cesarean section, but after repeated request did not yield any response. Due to lack of facilities for LSS operation, Dr. ABC proceeded to delivery with forceps delivery. A male baby was delivered at midnight at 1st October by use of forceps. Baby weight was 3.9 kg. No pediatrician or anesthetist was available during delivery, but Dr. ABC informed the patient and her husband there was nothing to worry. Mrs. XYZ and relatives noticed that the right hand of baby was absolutely limping and senseless. It was just hanging and inactive. Thus, they immediately informed to Dr. ABC, who at that time disclosed about forceps delivery in this case. At that time, they disclosed. Even despite several requests, Dr. ABC did not call any pediatrician to examine the child and assured that child would become normal in the due course of time and nothing to worry. Intentionally, the mother patient was discharged on the same day without any discharge slip to conceal the paralytic right hand of the child. Thereafter, we immediately consulted Dr. Pediatrician. She explained the child needs admission in ICU for proper treatment and investigation. She diagnosed it as Erb's palsy, that is nerves of right hand of the child were severely damaged due to the excessive pressure applied through forceps delivery. The discharge slip report of pediatrician is with the advice to consult a neurologist for further treatment. Thereafter, Mrs. XYZ consulted various reputed neurologists in the prime institutes of country. Everyone expressed about no apparent conventional treatment available except a major surgery. The parents have communicated and consulted Dr. K. He expressed in his letter dated that in most cases, cesarean section is preferred to deliver macrosomic fetus to avoid the brachial plexus injury. He also informed that it's quite expensive surgery. 6 to 7 lakhs will be the cost. The child at the age of 22 months underwent reconstructive surgery at a reputed institute despite huge expenses on the treatment and further follow-up and treatment in India at various hospitals. There was no cure to the child. Therefore, alleging medical negligence and complainant filed this complaint before Honorary Judge Shenoy sir and paid rupees 1 crore as compensation from Dr. ABC and hospital. Our concern, USG was done, Dr. Loda madam, Pooja Loda, USG was also done on 15th of September. Weight was 3.5 kg at 8.5 months. Why induction of labor was not done at this stage? Baby will have safe passage for this weight. Can you advise or you are giving only report?
Hello. Hello.
Dr. Pooja Loda is eminent fetal medicine consultant at Pune.
So, sir, when it was 3.5 kg at 8.5 months as a fetal medicine...
I would request all the experts to stand up and talk so that everybody sees who's talking.
As a fetal medicine specialist, if I did a scan on 15th of September and the weight was 3.5 kg, it is not my prerogative to advise induction or cesarean or delivery, but I would just mention that a macrosomic baby at this gestation means the maternal BSL is uncontrolled and they would take care of that from further there.
Because Dr. Pooja is fetal medicine consultant.
I would not agree.
She is not a radiologist. That's why we are expecting some advice from you.
So I would expect that the obstetrician would take care of the mother's sugars because this is definitely a big baby and I would report that in my report, but the mode of induction is something that I would not include in my report at all.
See this report, and family history of diabetes mellitus was also neglected. HbA1c was borderlines. So Dr. Shiradkar madam, what is your opinion in this case?
The only baby weight 3.5 is not sufficient information. To diagnose macrosomic baby, we should have relation with AC and HC. So unless until it is diagnosed, we can't say it is macrosomic, one thing. Secondly, there is no evidence that macrosomic baby should be, or the induction in macrosomic babies, it saves the injury. And third, if we see she is a pre-diabetic, so of course she has done a nice thing that she has not advised anything. But I think that not doing cesarean section for macrosomic baby was a right decision of the obstetrician. If you are talking only about that decision, we will discuss about further things later on.
Dr. Girija Wag, madam, why LSS was not done, in your opinion, in this case?
See, the patient went into spontaneous labor. So therefore, the doctor used his discretion to allow her a normal delivery, because we do not have such cutoffs based on the weight of the baby. Macrosomia is also a very arbitrary finding, biometric finding, and it has to be substantiated by many other things. Like then she should have been subjected to a color Doppler examination to see what has happened to the baby's heart, and if such detailing would have been available, then it was okay. Secondly, but important would be that if the fasting was 104, if you go by the Government of India guidelines, this patient should have started on some diabetic treatment, and today metformin 200 milligram is a standard of practice which could have been adopted, but that wouldn't have changed her macrosomia. Thirdly, a continuous fetal monitoring would have been a good practice in this baby when it was delivering vaginally.
Is there any role of partogram?
Yes.
Are you practicing?
Yes.
Yes. Madam, is there any consent required for forceps delivery, madam? Yes.
Yes, it is better if we take the consent for forceps delivery.
Why forceps delivery and consequences has not been explained to mother and relatives? Are you informing this?
Yes, usually we do send the patient's relative. We send somebody out.
My question is to pediatrician. Why, sir, what will you advise in these cases? Or palsy?
So many patients, they diagnose that as palsy or brachial plexus injury at the time of birth. Most of the patient, 90% of the patient will have got a spontaneous recovery. And if the nerve conduction facilities cannot be done at earlier age, then most of the times we will advise to wait for at least 3 months, and then only nerve conduction test can be done. After nerve conduction, if it is a recoverable report, then still we can wait for 6 months. But if it is not, then surgery can be planned at that time.
We have pediatric surgeon there, sir. What will you advise for this baby? What could have been done? And
Actually, I like to make it clear that nerve injuries are not dealt with pediatric surgeon as such. So I don't see nerve injuries in practice. So I'm not the proper person to advise on this case rather. Whatever advice pediatrician has given, I think it's fine.
see, qualified assistant should have been there. Any opinion, Shiradkar madam?
Pediatrician commenting that excessive force was used during delivery, it's something it should not have been done.
Because they told they खूप मोठ्याने ओढलं असं म्हणतात ते.
Forceps delivery excessive use of force, I think, because I am working from side of the patient, from the side of doctor, that's why.
So can we do LSS on request in these cases? On patient demand, can we do?
Cesarean section on demand is another completely a total different thing. Unfortunately, it has been defined by RCOG and all says that they have special consults for cesarean section on demand. We are silent on that as far as our country is concerned, because on one side we are concerned about the rising cesarean section rates, that's one. Secondly, even the RCOG today is considering taking consent for a vaginal delivery. That because they have had a similar kind of a case which has then gone into litigation. So these are things which I think the wisdom and the senior wisdom of our Foxy should take over and guide us on that. But whatever we have in hands is what we just now discussed.
Dr. M.C. Patel, cesarean on demand, what is your opinion?
Cesarean on demand, I will talk later on, but this particular case, usually whenever we face this type of case in court of law, in this court of Honorable Judge Gopinathji, first question we'll ask in the court, was it preventable? And you cannot say no, because almost all complications are preventable. So second question will come, what did you do to prevent it? Third questions will come, in spite of all your efforts, you couldn't prevent it. Then did you diagnose that complication in time? And then did you manage that complication way in which any prudent gynecologist would have managed? If you can answer all these 4 questions, I think it would be much in favor of doctor. Now up to Honorable Judge Gopinathji.
Sir, Shenoy sir, I want your judgment in this particular case on 4 points. Point number 1, the indication to wait for a vaginal delivery. Point number 2, occurrence of a birth injury. Point number 3, consent for assisted vaginal delivery, when to take. Because if the patient is in labor and pain, she is not in a mental condition to give any consent at that point in time. And point number 4, whether for a safe practice, if something like this goes wrong, then is it good that we conceal the fact that we've applied forceps delivery? These are 4 questions, sir.
Come again one by one afterwards. Huh? First I'll take up the issue of consent. See, it's a very wrong thing to say that a consent is not to be taken for any delivery. I would go one step up and say, for any indoor admission, consent is mandatory. Please take it. Even if there's hyperemesis gravidarum, you are admitting the patient just for an IV drip, take a consent. Consent is mandatory for all inpatient admissions. And inpatient admissions, consent can be of 2 types. One thing is something known as general consent, which you must take before the patient is taken inside. And subsequently, specific consents come in. So consent is mandatory. Now, is consent mandatory for a forceps delivery was one question that was asked. And the ruling there is 100% yes. Why? Because the forceps delivery falls into not a normal delivery. Remember, if at all there is some amount of interference done by whatever means, it ceases to be an FTND. It becomes a full-term forceps delivery. It is not a normal delivery, and therefore consent has got to be taken. Third thing, who should apply the forceps? Can a nurse apply the forceps? Answer is no. Can a RMO apply the forceps? Answer is no. Forceps is a very specialized procedure, and therefore it has got to be done by a person who is a postgraduate in obstetrics and gynecology. That means a doctor has got to, a gynecologist has got to apply forceps. In this particular case, I just want to ask one question. Was there shoulder dystocia?
Shoulder dystocia, no.
Because brachial nerve palsy, I think one of the conditions, most of the time the condition precedent to a brachial nerve palsy is a shoulder dystocia. When it comes to forceps delivery, it's going to be the facial nerve. So that is what I'm going to ask you. Yeah. Because why I'm saying this is...
Sir, baby weight was more.
Yeah, I'll come to that.
3.9.
Okay. Now,
it was 3.9 kg.
3.9. Now, is 3.9 an indication for a cesarean section is a question. Can you label a baby which is 3.9 as macrosomic? Answer is no. By going by the Indian standards, you need minimum baby weight to be 4 kg. And by the American standards, 4.5 kg. Now, if at all there is a macrosomic baby, there is a possibility that the head will come out. There's something known as turtling effect. You must be knowing what I'm saying. Yeah. Turtling effect.
Turtle
and when you try to gently deliver the baby by fundal pressure as well as traction on the neck, sometimes brachial nerve palsy does take place. Now, is there a guarantee that a cesarean section will prevent a brachial nerve palsy?
No.
No. Answer is no. In cesarean section also, the incidence of brachial nerve palsy is very much there, and therefore, whether you deliver the patient vaginally or by a scissor, brachial nerve palsy possibility is always there. Now, I'll go by the case laws. Is this issue decided by the courts? Answer is yes. Maharashtra State Commission very recently has decided this issue and awarded some compensation of some 13 lakhs or something like that. But don't get disheartened. This particular judgment of the Maharashtra State Commission has gone to the National Commission, and the National Commission has stayed this order. The moment it is stayed, that order is not existing in law. Has the National Commission decided such a case of brachial nerve palsy? There are 2 cases decided by the National Commission on brachial nerve palsy, and both the cases have given a clean chit to the doctors. And therefore, when a ruling of a superior forum, superior commission is available, the rulings given by the state commission or the district forum automatically get neutralized. Now, I made a statement, the National Commission has given a clean chit. Why is the question? Correct? Na? Normally, there is always a reasoning given as to why. And the National Commission says that that was a case of shoulder dystocia where there was a brachial nerve palsy, as the result of it there was a Erb's palsy as well as a Klumpke's palsy. Both were there with the Horner syndrome. All the 3 factors were there. Now, the National Commission has said that shoulder dystocia is something which cannot be predicted. And most of the textbooks also say shoulder dystocia is something which cannot be predicted. Even babies which are less than 4 kg also can have shoulder dystocia as the result of it.
Yes,
this will
sir.
happen.
Sir, we are falling short of time,
Okay,
so
done. Next.
I want this to be very crisp. So point number 1, follow protocols. Point number 2, there will always be a complication like this. Point number 3, if there is a complication, your defense should be good. Point number 4, there is always a court appellate which comes. So if you have a problem with district commission, state commission, a problem with state commission, national commission, problem with national commission, Supreme Court. So that's not a problem at all. Again, follow your protocols. These things are going to happen, and our experts are here, and we have sir with us to help. So thank you very much. We'll go to the next case.
And the last point is always rely upon textbooks in the court of law. You'll come out.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Pardeshi sir. We get the next case, Dr. Ajay Mane. Undiagnosed birth anomaly, and for all of you obstetricians who do ultrasound, radiologists, and fetal medicine specialists, undiagnosed anomaly compensation, you all have beaten neurosurgeons and orthopedic surgeons. If you miss a kidney, if you miss a limb, there are so many case laws, the compensation goes in lakhs of rupees. So अगर चैन से प्रैक्टिस करना है तो अभी जाग जाओ इस केस के लिए.
पेंटर बसत नाही का ना? Good afternoon. After such heavy meals, to stand here is a very difficult, and to sit alert is much more difficult than this. Okay. The pen drive is not been attached to, so I'll read the case. My case is 23 years old, primary gravida. NT scan was 2.3 millimeters. Nasal bone unavailable. USG done by gynecologist. Afterwards, animal scan done by radiologist. Age risk is 1:1200. Trisomy 21 on first trimester screening, and the baby was born with a tracheoesophageal fistula. Type 1, 2, 3, 4, any. So my allegation is the gynecologist who was the treating doctor for the patient was negligent enough to file a case against him as a negligence, first of all. Second, I need a compensation of 1 crore from the radiologist and gynecologist, half. And third, I want a complete treatment by the pediatric surgeon in a hi-fi hospital where you should treat the bachu and should be given treatment for whole life. As in 2 cases, Gitendra Bhai has given me references. Which? Srivastav case and the base hospital, they have been given treatment for whole life. Likewise, I need the treatment. So, experts. Pediatric surgeon, I want to ask you, what will be the risk of life in this case? Baby is delivered with a tube fistula and he succumbs. What is the condition?
Let me start with your first allegation. You need a compensation from radiologist as well as gynecologist. I'll be fair to both of them. Tracheoesophageal fistula is not an anomaly which is 100% diagnosed antenatally. There is no marker and on antenatal USG which can say that patient has got tracheoesophageal fistula. There are only 2 soft markers which might predict that patient can have tracheoesophageal fistula. One is polyhydramnios.
It is tentative. It is not.
One is polyhydramnios and second is absence of funding.
Yeah.
Not air bubble. Antenatally we don't see air bubble.
Pooja will elaborate that.
Absence of fetal stomach which you can see. Now, if you want to go anatomy-wise, the commonest tracheoesophageal fistula is one which has got upper blind and lower pouch which is communicating with the stomach. So, for all practical purposes, this patient which fits into 90% of the category will have an antenatal scan which will be exactly like a normal fetus. That is because antenatally you don't have air as a contrast. You just have fluid. So, you get fluid in trachea, you get fluid in the esophagus. So same thing is seen in both the tracts. So it's very difficult antenatally to diagnose tracheoesophageal fistula. But so if you say that the gynecologist or the sonologist has missed an anomaly, I think you are wrong.
No, it is not mentioned in that report that there is no tracheoesophageal fistula. This is my stand.
That doesn't mean that he has tracheoesophageal fistula and it has been missed.
Pooja?
There are 1,000 anomalies, we don't write it.
Sir, just adding on to what sir said, tracheoesophageal fistula and esophageal atresia are 2 different things.
Sir.
If there is a fistula between the trachea and the esophagus is blocked at the end, the water that the baby swallows will now go into the trachea, and which has a connection with the stomach bubble.
Yeah.
Therefore, you will be able to see an anechoic space which will look like a stomach bubble, but the fluid there has not come from the esophagus. This is the commonest type of tracheoesophageal fistula, and therefore, on antenatal scans where we find polyhydramniosine as high as 15%, we cannot keep mentioning on every report that this baby would have a tracheoesophageal fistula. We have a disclaimer line in the end of the report which says that all anomalies cannot be detected antenatally. There could be some which evolve with further gestation and even postnatally, and this is the best example for that.
Okay, no, I want to ask one question to, hey, काम करते का भाऊ आवाज? Okay, so one question to maybe you, Pooja, and other experts here. Do we have, because we always say Shenoy sir protocol based, we should have guidelines, protocols. Do we have a list of anomalies that should never be missed, which may be missed, which can be missed, and which are always missed?
Yes, sir. There is a list, and this comes into maybe missed. Tracheoesophageal fistula
is it
comes into maybe
authenticated
missed.
list?
Sorry, it's not
Authentication done?
authenticated. There is no guidelines or authenticated list on what can and cannot be. Yeah, we should, but there isn't.
So, moral of the story is, again, fetal medicine guys, sonologists should have a list of, anomalies, because in the court, a small anomaly like a sixth finger will also be equated to how this is missed. And maybe it can go into a line of, even if there is no problem damage, but how can you miss it? Because so much amount of money is spent. So that is why I asked that question.
Pediatric surgeon, what is the cost of operation?
I have a small question here.
you
There
are
were
judge.
how many
You
sonographies
have to
done, you
answer.
said?
Sir.
3.
Pardon?
In this case, 3. All were level 1 scans or level 2 scans?
Level
This
2
is very
scan.
important, because, all were level 1 scans?
Nowadays guidelines, level 1, level 2 is vanished.
No, but was there an anomaly scan done?
As per Gitendra sir, pardon?
Was there an anomaly scan done in this
Yes,
case?
anomaly
In
scan
this
done by
case?
radiologist. Yes.
In this case,
It
done?
was
Yes,
done,
done.
sir.
Done.
Yes, sir.
Missed. So who is responsible, gynecologist or radiologist?
Nobody is responsible.
Shirokar madam.
Neither of them.
Nobody is responsible.
But I'm insisting both are responsible. Kindly file a negligence case against them.
Coming to your point of
Sir.
prognosis, sir, you said you want compensation.
Yeah, please.
Tracheoesophageal fistula, whether it is tracheoesophageal fistula, whether it is diagnosed antenatally or postnatally, there are plenty of studies which says that prognostically the outcome of both the babies is almost the same. Okay. And the survival for an average baby with tracheoesophageal fistula is around 95%, 90 to 95%.
Yeah.
Whether even if the anomaly is missed antenatally.
Should be
It is
diagnosed as soon as
postnatally also.
Should be diagnosed as soon as it gets birth.
It should be diagnosed in labor room.
Nah. But what is the procedure? How to diagnose?
It's a simple.
Just for general people, I'm asking.
You can
not
put
medical
in,
legal.
you can put in a feeding tube in the esophagus which obstructs in less than 10 centimeter on the neck.
So we need a pediatrician in labor room.
You need a pediatric surgeon also.
So those charges for the delivery 10,000 and pediatric surgeon will charge 20,000 for his presence.
No, we don't charge that much for a visit.
Sir, what is the cost of operation?
We are not blessed.
Sir, cost of operation.
So cost of operation will vary depending on what setup you choose.
I want 5-star hotel, hospital.
Now then the sky is the limit.
Okay, so the point is, and I'll now go to Dr. Shenoy sir. The point is, my question to you, sir, is if an anomaly scan is done and a good disclaimer is put on the report that sonography is not sacrosanct in diagnosing each and every anomaly, there are restrictions on the image ultrasound machine gives with respect to amount of liquor, position of baby, presence of placenta, maternal obesity, so on and so forth. If my disclaimer is good on the report, is it a good defense?
Absolutely a good defense. And every sonologist must put this on the report. Trust me. And I've also gone one step ahead and I've told my sonology friends, always write at the end, second opinion advisable. Please do it. It doesn't matter if everybody puts that second opinion advisable. I think you will be out of the woods if at all there's going to be a litigation. Now, what is the defense in this particular case? There are some judgments which I think we don't have time. Otherwise, I would have discussed it. But what is the defense in this case? See, two things that are very important. One is the standard of care. What is the standard of care expected from a radiologist whenever he does an anomaly scan? And the answer to this question is, Lord does not expect the radiologist to be perfect. the best, nor does the law expect the radiologist to be bad at his work. If at all the radiologist is somewhere in between, that serves the purpose as far as law is concerned, and that is why the word reasonable is always used. If at all the radiologist was reasonable, that is good enough. Second question is, there is something known as inherent risk factors with every kind of a procedure that we do, and the law has accepted these inherent risk factors. And missing an anomaly scan is one of the inherent risk factors with any kind of an anomaly scan. And worldwide, if you go, there is something known as failure rate, which has been identified by everybody, by all studies. And therefore, if at all you are able to prove to the court that this is an inherent risk and could have been missed by the best of the persons anywhere in the world, I have also missed it.
Yes, sir. So reasonable care. Yeah. And it doesn't turn out to be a TOF. Correct.
Otherwise also it is not to be treated in trial.
Yeah. Okay, so the point taken, the point taken that you need a good disclaimer, you need a good defense, and certain anomalies can be missed. Thank you, Dr. Ajay Mane, and I want all of you to give a big round of applause to Ajay Mane because this was his idea. He circulated this idea. Yeah, so Dr. Saili and him, they circulated this kind of discussion. And it is good because now so many experts are answering.
Sir,
and I know, sir, what you told me before you came here. Sir said any anomalies which I am operating in and around Amravati, because he is the faculty now at AMOX, he'll do it for free. So clap for sir also. No problem.
I'd like to make just a comment so that the take-home message is clear. This we are discussing an anomaly which has been missed. But if an anomaly like tracheostomy fistula is diagnosed antenatally, kindly take an opinion of pediatric surgeon antenatally. And just in case if you don't have a pediatric surgeon available in that town, give an option of in utero transfer to the patient to a center where pediatric surgery facilities are available.
Yes, okay.
If it is suspected antenatally. If it is missed, then you're not to be blamed.
So is Shantanu there? He always says, Baal peti peksha potat patwao. That is Shantanu's dialogue. All right,
also
okay.
do a karyotype of this baby because underlying 30% chromosomal abnormality. So once, so in this case, he mentioned it subtly, but none of us observed. He said that the NT was 2.3. Now, since this is not you versus us, but a message to go back home, what he said was that the NT was 2.3, which was actually missed in this case. And if it would have been followed up, 30% of babies with esophageal atresia will have underlying trisomy 21. So as soon as you doubt there is polyhydramnios and a small absent or even a normal stomach bubble, advise that all tracheoesophageal fistulas cannot show us absent stomach bubble. Go and do an amniocentesis and a karyotype irrespective of the gestational age, because now we can terminate at any gestational age through the court and then take help of a pediatric surgeon once the karyotype is normal, because then he would explain the prognosis postnatally.
Yeah, okay. So do pay attention to NT scan. All right, okay. So we take the next case. It is very extremely important. Preterm birth with retinopathy of prematurity, ROP. Dr. Sudesh Doshi will take the case.
Laptop. The first time ROP, we know all ROP as right occipital posterior position. I was confused when Dr. Saili said that you will have to talk on ROP. I said, what is to be talked about ROP in medical legal cases? Then I went to the literature. Literally, even after practicing for last 22 years, I was unaware of all these complications. I practice at a small place. So maybe we don't have that much prematurity with us being treated at my place. But I went to the literature. I have a case here. A patient, Mrs. ABC, came into spontaneous labor, delivered around 1.7 kg baby at 33 weeks of gestational age. She was delivered. She was seen by the pediatrician, was advised a neonatal admission in ICU. But the patient's relatives said that neonatal ICU admission, they are not affording it. So treatment was given in the hospital only, in the nursing home, where good care was taken, breastfeeding was established, baby was fine. So was discharged on day 4, along with all instructions about immunization and neonatal care. There was no special care mentioned about taking an ophthalm opinion or any screening for retinopathy of prematurity. So the patient landed after 2 months with loss of vision for the baby. So rather than putting up the case, I would put a few questions to the experts, because I feel that the audience of who are of my standards, I'm an average person, I was aware of all of these things, so I would like experts to comment on all these things. So I would ask the pediatrician, what is the routine screening for retinopathy of prematurity recommended in which babies?
So there are two recommendations. One is by NNF, National Neonatology Forum, and another is by government. Being a pediatrician, I used to follow NNF guidelines, which says that all the babies who is born before 34 weeks or all the babies whose birth weight is less than 1.75 kgs, they should be screened for ROP. If the babies who are more than 34 weeks but having some high risk factors, like the patient required ventilation, patient is on prolonged oxygen treatment, patient has got a sepsis, blood transfusion, anemia, repeated episodes of apnea, intracranial hemorrhages. If these high risk factors are there, then even if the gestational is more than 34 weeks or if the weight of the child is more than 1.75, such baby should be screened for ROP. Question is, if the baby is more than 34 weeks but not admitted, then even if it is not admitted for any reason because it was low risk child, still such babies, if some problem develops or some high risk is there, should be screened. So most of the babies, if you feel it is a preterm or NICU admission, it requires ROP.
So this is a new take-home message for all of our obstetricians, that we were worried about surfactant, we were worried about respiratory maturity, we were worried about the weight of the baby, but now we have to look into the eyes of the baby also. Yes, man wants to add something to it.
As he has said that he is following neonatologist guidelines, but government has given those guidelines and I think they are more applicable for all of us. And government has advised every baby less than 2000 grams needs to be screened for various anomalies which may develop and progress afterwards. And that is why every baby less than 2000 must be screened for various
So we gynecologists need to be aware of this and make our pediatrician friends also aware of this.
Government guidelines is less than 2 kg. But considering the statistics, almost 8% of the babies, they are less than 2 kg. So the population will be too much. Screening for ophthalmologists.
Okay, we take it here and there, but the take-home message is around 34 weeks, less than 1.8 or 2 kg. Please add this one more screening to this. The next point is, when should this screening be done? At birth, in the labor room, in the wards, at the home, at the Barca, at the first birthday?
So at the first time of screening should be decided by what was the gestational age. If the gestational age of the child is more than 28 weeks, then baby should be screened at 4 weeks of life, 4 weeks post death. And if the gestational age of the baby is less than 28 weeks, then baby should be screened at 15 to 21 days first screening. And ophthalmologists will decide what is the zone involved, what is the stage of the ROP, and then further follow-up is advised. Sometimes if the zone is zone 1 plus, then every 7 days or every 10 days need to be followed. Or if the zone is zone 3, then maybe after 3 weeks or 4 weeks it has to be followed.
Okay, so my question is, this is what I learned from discussing with people who are managing NICUs. So what happens is, if there is a preterm birth, we immediately transfer the baby to NICU. Now in NICU, different people have different protocols of starting oxygen. And there are very few neonatal ICUs which have people. So we have one at Bharati Vidyapeeth, and this is what I learned from Dr. Pradeep Suryavanshi, who is managing it, one of my very close friends. Every day they decide how to stop or reduce the oxygen given to preterm. So even that becomes extremely important, because we shift the baby, then the entire onus or everything now lies in the person who's managing the NICU. So what is your take on restricting the oxygen, or what do you all do there to prevent this?
We are all doctors. We are obsessed with 100%. Getting mass 100%, scoring 100%, which is not true with the saturation. Saturation, we don't expect 100% for newborn. We expect 90 or 92, okay. So try to give oxygen so that oxygen saturation will be in the range of 90 to 94, not more than that.
Okay, so as we learned in our textbooks, some of us must be remembering that retinopathy of newborn, or we said retrolental fibroplasia, that was the word only which I remembered about all these things, and it was due to excessive oxygen.
Because you did not take the NEET exam.
It was not there at that time. And I don't regret giving it. For last 22 years, I have practiced well, successfully, and I'm standing here in spite of not giving a NIT. So that has proven my success. NIT is only for those who want to win the race.
We are NEET, man.
So, Rector, how frequently should the infant be screened again, as you said?
So it depends upon different level. There is a condition called which zone is involved, zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, and what is the stage of disease at present. Most of the time, ROP, if it is diagnosed, it will settle on its own, because the incidence says that almost if the baby is less than 28 weeks, 90% of the baby will have ROP. And if the baby is more than 32 weeks, even 15% of the babies will have ROP at the time. But all the babies doesn't require treatment. Most of the babies will, problem will solve with the time. But the screening depends upon at what zone is involved and whether it is a plus and whether what is the stage of the ROP. So let the ophthalmologist take the call. Probably if there is a higher risk, then only every weekly has to be operated.
Sir, Gopinath sir.
See, there is a case law decided by the Supreme Court on this particular issue. And for those who are interested in the case law, it is Krishna Kumar versus the state of Tamil Nadu, if you remember this. And in this case, the Supreme Court awarded the parents a sum of ₹1 crore as compensation for the child, where the child, yeah, something like that. Child was bilaterally blind. Now see, I'll tell you what the discussion in that case was. Many a times it so happens that the child has long phases of apnea, as a result of which ventilator support becomes absolutely essential, and SpO2 has got to be maintained at the ideal level, which many a times requires 100% of oxygen to be given. Now, when 100% oxygen is given for a prolonged period of time, this retinopathy of prematurity, when I was a student, it was retrolental fibroplasia, as you rightly said.
Yes.
I'm talking about 1971, 71, you know, at that time. So now we have become ROPs, you know.
I was born in that year.
Yeah. Marathi ROPs means accused. That is the problem. So the Supreme Court said that many a times it is possible that the doctor is stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea. If at all you give 100% oxygen, possibility of ROP. If you don't give 100% oxygen, there is a possibility of a cerebral palsy. Remember, on both the sides, it is a no good situation. So in such situations, what the doctor must do is whatever he feels is in the best interest of the baby, but the doctor must do it with consent. And in this particular Tamil Nadu case, Krishna Kumar versus Tamil Nadu, the doctors made an averment in the court saying that we had told the patient, we had counseled the patient about the possibilities of blindness because of the long-term oxygenation, but somehow when the court asked them, show it in the case papers where you have written that you have counseled the patient and you have taken the consent of the patient with respect to this particular problem, they could not. So what is the take-home message? Each and every patient whom 100% oxygen is being given for a prolonged period of time, it becomes mandatory for each and every obstetrician, each and every neonatologist to put it on paper and take the signature of the patient that they have been explained of the possibilities of ROP. Please do it. And if at all that is done, maybe even if at all there is a blindness, this particular informed consent that you have taken will see that you are out of the woods. Yes. Secondly, yes. Along with the eye, you must also study the ear, because in prematurities, the ear problem also goes hand in hand with this particular problem. So discharge card, make it a point to mention that you have explained the possibilities of a ROP in future, and therefore regular follow-up is required. Even if you don't do it, it doesn't matter. Mention it.
So थोडक्यात काय हे बरंच कॉम्प्लिकेटेड आहे. एकदा बाळ झाली की पिडियाट्रिशियनकडे पाठवून द्या, जे काय सांगायचं तू करन, तूच तिकडे संपवून सांगायचं, आपण आपल्या आईसोबत सुखी राहायचं.
Okay, thank you Sudesh for your case. We have time till 3:30 sir. इतना घंटे क्यों बजा रहे? 3:30 के पहले खत्म करेंगे. या वन केस वो बहुत छोटा सा 3:30 तक टाइम है, बहुत अच्छे से जा रहे हैं हम लोग. ओके, सो द केस विच आई एम गोइंग टू प्रेजेंट, म्यूजिक भी चालू हो गया अभी. द केस विच आई एम गोइंग टू प्रेजेंट इज अबाउट बर्थ एस्फिक्सिया. ये बंद कर सकते हैं मैडम पीछे का म्यूजिक? ये पीछे का म्यूजिक बंद हो सकता है तो? हाँ, या ओके, ऑल राइट. सो दिस बर्थ एस्फिक्सिया थिंग, it is something which bothers us for a very long time. Before we go for that case, I'll tell you something which happened in our own city of Pune. So there was this couple who had a boy and who went to engineering college, and he failed in the first semester. Again appeared for the exam of engineering, failed again, failed the third time. So the parents thought that maybe something is wrong, so they took the boy to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist examined the boy, and the psychiatrist, unfortunately, he told the parents when this boy was born, blood supply to his brain was slightly reduced. So he is fit to do BCom or BA, but he is not fit to do engineering. Now the story doesn't end there. This couple went to the doctor who delivered, and they wanted case papers. Now, okay, we can destroy case papers after 3 years, whatever rule that everybody knows. But fortunately or unfortunately, the doctor had the case papers. And the doctor called me, should I give the case papers? Then I said, sir, okay, open the case paper and refer to the notes where Apgar score is written and tell me what is the Apgar score. He said, at birth 9 on 10, 5 minutes 10 on 10. म्हणजे बरोबर आहे ना, थोडासा blood supply. So I said, sir, with all due respect, you call the pediatrician and make it 10 on 10. But unfortunately, by that time, the pediatrician had died. So then how we managed, I'll tell you over tea. But birth asphyxia is something which bothers you for a very long time. So next case which I am discussing is birth asphyxia. There's no PPT, straightforward case, I'll tell you. A 30-year-old primigravida who is from a very good family, so they always do ANC follow-up and everything was done. And she comes to a good hospital. So we are not talking about PHCs and no, she comes to a good hospital with everything is there, only on a Diwali night with labor pains. So on chutti, generally, you know. So any which ways, so the duty doctors called the consultant, they monitored her properly. After monitoring, the labor went on very well. In between, she developed meconium stained liquor. She was advised a cesarean section, which she refused. She said, no, we'll carry on with the labor. And they carried on with the labor, and this female delivered. Once she delivered, there was thick meconium stained liquor. The baby did not cry. The baby was shifted to NICU, so on and so forth. And later, the baby was diagnosed as having cerebral palsy because of birth asphyxia. Now, this is what has happened. So the questions which come and which I'm going to put to all of you. So if a patient gets admitted in a hospital, in how much time is the consultant supposed to see the patient? And question B is, if he is not able to see the patient, whom should the consultant delegate in his place to go and see a patient in labor? This is gynaec, this is obstetric question.
Reasonable time.
So what is a reasonable time?
So if the patient was in latent phase of labor, and if you have a competent assistant, usually we have such people who are there, and they have taken an electronic, maybe an admission test, I think we can wait till she is progressing and maybe go in when she goes into active phase of labor.
All right. So you have a BHMS or a BAMS person as your assistant?
No, we don't.
Gitendra sir? BAMS or BHMS patient assistant you have, but that person has worked with you for last 20 years. तुम्हारे से अच्छी delivery और episiotomy तो वो करता है.
See, basically FHS can be seen by BAMS or BHMS because that is seen by the Doppler machine only.
Yes.
So they can definitely see that. There are different guidelines available. See, WHO guidelines are available that whenever patient is in labor room, you have to see FHS every half an hour, at least. And PV must be done after latent phase, PV must be done every 4 hours. That is the guideline of WHO. A case is been going on in National Commission and in Punjab State Commission also, in which again the decision has come that if you have not seen the patient every 4 hourly, PV is not, although there are guidelines also that PV should be done minimum, but still courts are following the guidelines which are given in our textbooks and different guidelines. So WHO guidelines says that during the labor, if patient is admitted in labor room, you are supposed to do PV examination every 4 hours, FHS every half an hour.
Okay.
So that is the guideline.
All right. So point taken. Next issue is partogram mandatory? Yes, ma'am, please.
Sir, I just want to...
Yeah, sure.
Regarding partogram again, previously it was mandatory to maintain partogram, but recently WHO guideline has said that in latent phase no partogram is required at all. So modified partogram is now available and that is to be maintained in the
So even active phase has changed. Okay, so before madam answers, truthfully, I don't want raise of hands. Truthfully, आंख बंद करके सच्चे दिल से जिसको आप प्यार करते हो उसकी कसम लेके खुद को ही बताओ कितने लोग पार्टोग्राम मेंटेन करते हैं?
वैलेंटाइन डे है अभी।
ये हाथ मत करो, मेरे को मालूम है आंसर. So, okay, yes, okay, all right, ma'am, you wanted to say?
I just wanted to elaborate that when the doctor should have been seen, so there are certain guidelines that if the patient is regularly coming to a doctor, then there should be a delivery plan mentioned on the paper.
Yes.
So if all other risk factors are ruled out and she is kept for a vaginal delivery, then the assistant on whom or he is a trustworthy, he or she, they can trust on him or her.
So the issue is, this was the point in one of the Karnataka State Commission cases where they said what Madam said, in reasonable time you have to go and see, and in that particular case they said the reasonable time considering where the person was staying was 3 hours. But that is limited to that particular case only. It is not limited to all. My next question is, so yes sir, please.
I think Gitendra didn't answer this question. What you wanted to, by what time it will see? Reasonable time is very good to say, but if the court asks you to see a guideline, there are many hospital groups who maintain guideline, and their guidelines are very clear-cut that an emergency admission has to be seen within an hour, and elective admission has to be seen between 12 to 24 hours.
Okay.
Now, labor patients, if they are your book patients, you can pass it on by saying that these are elective admissions, there is a labor plan there.
Yes.
Who will examine? You can always defend. It doesn't have to be a gynecologist as long as the person is trained.
Yeah.
Because at one point of time we are talking of midwives taking over, so there is absolutely no question of that. But I think we need to be very clear by when we should go and see when a patient gets admitted.
All right. Okay.
Sir, regarding guidelines, hospital cannot make their own guidelines.
No, it's
what is standard?
Yeah, it's a SOP which some hospitals will follow.
No, so those SOPs should be according to some guidelines which are allowed. See, standard textbooks, if something is written in standard textbook, if something is written in standard journals which are applicable in our...
Point taken, sir. Point taken. I understand.
Something which is followed by in peer group, and something which is taught to us by our teachers in our colleges.
Yes.
So that is considered as standard in the court of law. Our own guidelines are not considered.
So the point is, for a particular hospital where you are working, if you follow, it becomes easier to manage patients. Now my next question is that, okay, we've had a birth asphyxia. Does continuous fetal heart monitoring wave feel better than intermittent? Or should it be intermittent for low risk and continuous for high risk? Or should it be continuous for... No, I want fetal monitoring. Yeah. We have other, yes,
there
continuous.
There is nothing specific about it. Even intermittent monitoring of the fetal heart is equivalent to a continuous electronic fetal monitoring.
All right.
Even if you do monitoring with a handheld Doppler, that's also safe, but you have to document it and you have to do it at a periodic time.
2 minutes. Yeah, 2 minutes. 100%. Yes.
Intermittent auscultation has its guidelines. Intermittent auscultation is every 15 minutes.
15 and 5 and
15
and 50.
then 5, and you have to hear for 1 minute after a contraction to look for a post-contraction
So if you,
that has to be documented.
That is ACOG, it is 30, 15 in first stage for low risk, 15 and 5 in second stage. Yes, okay, yeah, all right, okay. So next point is, and this is the point which, you know, after our discussion gets over, I also want to discuss with Dr. Shenoy sir, and this is something which is coming up for a laboring patient, and I just brought this up. In a laboring patient, a patient who has pain, a patient who is in labor, is she able to give a free consent for cesarean section? Because there is a case which says that if a consent is taken for a lady and they complained, I was so much in pain that, you know, I agreed for a cesarean section, but it was not a free consent. So in that case, do we take consent? So when I ask this to so many people, the common explanation is you have ANC classes, the patient is coming with you forever, you should tell the assisted vaginal delivery techniques or cesarean section techniques and then take a consent letter. So do we do that? What do you all do? Sir, पहले लोगों से पूछ लेते हैं, फिर आप फाइनल जवाब दे देना क्या करना चाहिए, क्योंकि okay, cesarean section consent, how many of you take when the patient is in labor? Now please understand, cesarean section consent is the consent of the patient, not the husband or mother-in-law or some dadi. Okay, that is not patient and doctor, there is a contract, I need not go into details. So when do you take a consent for cesarean? Is it when the patient is in labor if she requires a cesarean section? Let us have raise of hands. In labor when she requires a cesarean section?
Anticipatory.
Okay, before labor cesarean section may be required at any time. बाकी के लोग क्या विदाउट कंसेंट करते हैं? All right, so, okay, sir. So when should a consent be free consent, because pain is the issue?
See, when patient is in labor, there are intermittent phase when there is no contraction at all. So in that particular time, you can definitely take consent. So it is not that you cannot take consent in a patient undergoing pain, labor pains. Now second thing is, when you have not taken consent and done something, then the burden of proof is on your head in the court of law to prove that when patient was undergoing pain, if I could have taken the consent, that would not have been the free consent. So that is the burden on the doctor's head to prove why without consent something has been done. Otherwise, consent is to be taken.
Okay, sir. Now my question is to the pediatrician guys. Two things. One is the notes which you write. So we, as a prudent practice, we call pediatricians even for normal delivery. I mean, I do that. Maybe I am overcautious. But the notes which you write, and I did not have a PPT just now. Trust me, nobody can read them. And they do not give anything. So, for example, you do so many things. For example, you said you put a nasogastric tube, you put a nasogastric tube through the anus, through all the openings. But you don't write all that on paper. So, how a good pediatrician should write notes, and which are legible and understandable with very few short forms. IVO, in view of. BDAC, some baby delivered and cried at birth. ऐसा नहीं करके अच्छे notes. That is my first thing. Second thing is, whenever we send a baby to NICU, the first counseling of the couple, they are so afraid as if they have seen a Ram Gopal Verma horror. So why is that happening? Is it a defensive practice so that something happens, then you are not in a soup? And what do you all recommend? क्या करना चाहिए sir?
At birth, we should mention whether the baby cried immediately after or not, or baby required some resuscitation measures. If baby cried immediately, no resuscitation efforts required, then you should mention. But even if apart from suction, if anything is required, like even the stimulation is required, it should be written that baby cried only after stimulation. So it is a part of a resuscitation. It is not a part of a routine care.
Okay.
And whenever we write resuscitation notes, Apgar score should be mentioned. Though Apgar score, it is only for how good we are doing resuscitation, but it is what was the Apgar at birth and what was the Apgar at 5 minutes will tell us whether the child has got antenatal problem which has led to birth asphyxia or post-delivery problem which has led to birth ulcer. So
okay, all right.
Apgar and 5 minutes are very important.
Okay. Pooja, I have a question for you. I have a question for you because I have been bothering you with messages. हाँ यार, एक ही question है. Because there are patients who have normal Dopplers at term. We do an admission test or NST, it is normal, no risk factor, and suddenly in labor they have thick meconium stained lichens, right? So what is the correlation of Doppler versus non-stress test versus if you think, I don't know if anybody is doing cord blood gases, I am not so sure about it. Yes.
There are two types of insults that can cause birth asphyxia. Before we hand over the neonate to the pediatrician, we need to be legally safe and we need to help the pediatrician counsel the couple. There is a simple way we can do that. Despite a normal Doppler scan done today, if she delivers today night, still the baby could have birth asphyxia because it could be an intrapartum event. The best thing we can do to save our skin as obstetricians is to do a routine ABG cord ABG in all the deliveries, be it normal or cesarean. It is not expensive. Girija ma'am and the unit is following it at Bharati Vidyapeeth, which is not a corporate hospital, and this saves us. So if the ABG says that there was acidosis as soon as the baby was born, which means that this was a long-term compromise, which is very typically seen in a pre-eclamptic mother in an IUGR baby, in which the Dopplers would have been deranged. But if the ABG is normal, which means we are safe, that at least something was not chronic which we missed on, and it was something acute that could happen with any baby intrapartum. So ABG is something that we should all do for all deliveries, irrespective of the high and the low risk, and it can save us. Also click a picture of the ABG and keep, because it goes away. Like you say for CTG,
yes,
it holds true for the ABG as well. It just goes away in like a few days.
All right, sir. Shenoy sir, your take on birth asphyxia and how do we handle this situation?
See, first and foremost, birth asphyxias are one of the worst cases to handle in the court because it never comes in the favor of the doctors. Trust me. So many I have handled, but it becomes very difficult. More particularly, when the mother brings that child in the court and slowly, pinches the child so that the child starts crying and the attention of the judges go towards the child. This is I'm telling you, it's a fact. They do it.
Sir, if I have that case, I will go and cry in court.
So it becomes a very difficult proposition to handle because judges are human beings, and when they see the child in that particular condition, the tendency is more towards giving compensation to the child. First thing, you trust me, this is the way it's going to happen. Second question is whether a homeopath can conduct a delivery or an Ayurveda Acharya can conduct a delivery. This was the question put, and everybody said no. I'm telling you, homeopaths can do it. Ayurvedics also can do it. An auxiliary nurse midwife can do it. A plain simple qualified nurse can do it. Everybody can conduct a normal delivery. There is no problem. But when it comes to obstetric delivery, surgical delivery, cesarean section or a forceps or a vacuum, interventional delivery, this has got to be done by somebody who is qualified to do it. Now today, in Ayurveda, there is MS Ayurveda and obstetrics and gynecology, and they are trained, and they are trained to conduct a cesarean section, and they are authorized and qualified to do it. So the things are moving ahead, and with Ayush coming in, I think more and more liberation is going to take place. That is the way I look at it. That's it. Any other?
Okay, sir. Thank you. Sir, yes, sir.
If many institutes where cord ABGs cannot be done, we recommend to do ABG immediately after the baby is stabilized. Baby's ABG, if baby's ABG shows pH of less than 7.1, it shows birth asphyxia. It is almost can be considered as equivalent to cord ABG.
Okay, and cord around neck, don't consider it very important. Yes, sir.
By looking at the time,
we have to do it ABG as soon as baby is stabilized, preferably within half hour after the baby is delivered.
Okay. Sir,
the basic thing is most of the cases of cerebral asphyxia decided by a court, the latest is Soni Verma versus Apollo Hospital, Delhi. See, in most of the cases, the case is decided due to the poor documentation. And if your documentation is perfect, nothing is to worry. So the message is that keep your documentation proper and never ever try to alter document when at the time of production of document.
Okay, so you don't want to land up with forgery. That's point number one. And point number two, before I call all the experts on stage for a photograph, and this is what I tell every time when we finish a medico legal discussion, that close your eyes और फिर उसी बंदे के बारे में सोचो जिसके ऊपर आप सबसे ज़्यादा प्यार करते हो, और आज ये डिसाइड करो कि आज के बाद किसी डॉक्टर कलीग के अगेंस्ट बिचिंग नहीं होगा. You will not talk ill about any other person. You can always say, this is my opinion, this is that person's opinion, opinions may differ, but do not speak ill about others. I am not saying that if somebody is black sheep, don't report. Report. SD कर रहा है, गलत काम कर रहा है, 100% report करो. लेकिन मेरी साड़ी या मेरा धोतर, इसकी साड़ी या धोतर से सफ़ेद कैसे, हम डॉक्टर लोग इसमें नहीं पड़ेंगे. Thank you very much. I invite all the experts for a group photo here. Please come on the desk.
Quickly, we can get...